We're back.
Week 3.
Week 3.
It's been 3 weeks. Look, we got disguises this time. Like,
I changed.
changed. Let me see. I can't wear a hat. I always want to be the guy to wear the hat backwards. I was when I was younger.
Oh, yeah, you could. Backwards, not forwards.
Hey, what do you think? Should I wear this hat backwards? I feel cool now. I always want to be a cool kid. Yeah. Do bald people wear hats backwards?
Let's talk about the last part of the trust triangle. So we've covered authenticity on week 1, empathy on week 2, and now this week.
But I think most people understand the empathy, and they can see the empathy and the authenticity playing into trust. Mm-hmm. Where they really struggle is the logic part. And logic is one. Well, the first two is I have to sense that you care, and I have to sense that you are who you say you are. Right? So I have to sense you're authentic, and I have to sense you're empathetic. I don't know. The third one is logic. And what logic means is your decision-making has to be sound to me. What you're saying and what you're doing has to make sense to me. If it doesn't make sense to me, you can be the most authentic and the most empathetic person in the world. But if what you're doing doesn't add up, I don't get it, and I'm out. And so the challenge is do your actions and your words, do they communicate to the buyer what the buyer's logic is? This is really hard because I speak Chad, you speak Morgan. There's two totally different languages there. Buyer speaks buyer, salesperson speaks salesperson, leader speaks leader, employee speaks employee. So there's a lot of stuff lost in communication. So it's got to make sense to me. Your behaviors, your actions, your decisions, they all have to make sense to me. And there's a lot of times where we just can't make things add up. So we lose people in the communication gap. And so let me give you an example. So I'll give you an example how we lose people post-contract. We lose trust post-contract. So we say something. A buyer has a house under contract, and we start working on the house. And the buyer drives by this house 2 or 3 days in a row, and there's nothing happening on the house. There's no progress being made in the house. Nobody's working on the house. The buyer calls the salesperson, or the buyer calls the construction manager and says, "Hey, I've been by 3 days in a row, and nobody's working on my house." And the sales manager or the construction person goes, the superintendent goes, "Yeah, don't worry about that. We're in for inspection. We're waiting for inspection to get done. Once that gets done, everything gets resumed." Well, that makes perfect sense. That makes logical sense if you're in the construction industry. It doesn't make sense to a buyer because the buyer is going, "Well, I don't understand. You could be putting the driveway down. You could be putting the windows in. You're waiting on electrical. Do some other stuff. Like let's." Well, the challenge is just because it's logical to us doesn't make it logical to them. And there's a gap. And now I don't trust it. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't add up. This is why people struggle transferring politics, because your logic about politics is different than my logic about politics. And you may be a nice person. I have great friends. I have really, really good friends that there's a lack of trust because I just don't get their thinking. I'm like, well, how can you think that? And how can you think that? And it doesn't make sense. They haven't made it make sense to me, and vice versa. And so, how do you do this? How do you make that gap of communication better? Storytelling. Storytelling is the methodology that binds all languages together. That's why Zig Ziglar once said, the greatest salespeople are the greatest storytellers, because facts tell, stories sell. We did a video on that a couple weeks ago. Well, the idea is when I have facts and I put them in story form, it makes me go, yeah, I get it. And I talked about it. I talked about that one of the hardest things about writing my book was trying to write the stories in a way that the readers would go, I could see myself in that. I get it now. I could have just made it. If you read James Clear's Atomic Habits, it's a great book. It's a really hard read at some point because there's not a ton of stories in it. And so people are like trying to get it and understand it. Really great book, one of the best books written of all time. But the way that you make more people get it is through storytelling. And so you have to be a great storyteller. You have to be empathetic. You have to be authentic. Then use your authenticity and use the perspective and the information you found by the buyer and communicate to them in a language that they understand, which is stories. So if I get it and I understand what you're saying, it makes sense. I trust you, right? I trust that what you're saying is sound. I trust your reasoning. I trust your decision making because you've made me understand it. So I have to understand you at the sense that you care and at the sense that you are who you say you are. These are the three components. And think about this, Morgan. Who is the person that you trust most in the world? Of all the people in the world, who do you trust most?
My husband.
Your husband, right? So how long have you been together?
7 years. Well, married 7 years.
And how long were you together before that?
We're like 11 years total.
11 years total, right? So do you have to sense whether he's being authentic or do you know?
I know.
You know. Mm-hmm. Do you have to sense whether he cares or do you know?
I know.
Do you know how to speak Brett?
Yes.
Does Brett know how to speak Morgan?
Yes.
Hell no. Nobody understands that, right? Yeah. So
should have known that was coming.
So what happens is over the length of the relationship, the sensing it's no longer sensing, it's knowing. Well, how does it go from sensing to knowing? Well, his behavior support it. He does what he says he's going to do. He communicates in a way that's important. He asks you questions to understand your perspective. So it starts off this very, very thin triangle in that first couple minutes. Well, this is why the meet and greet is the most important part of the sales process, because it makes the connection on those three. If you fail authenticity, if you fail empathy, if you don't make it make sense, then what happens is that triangle never forms, which means you never gain trust. In that meet and greet, you connect those three parts. It's thin, it's flimsy, it's all all created on this idea of sensing. But then, as they start to know you, the actions start to make sense. Like, okay, they show me they care. They know when my birthday is. They know about my kids. They've asked about what my kids want in the room. They've done things above and beyond. They're consistent in their behaviors, which means they're supporting the authenticity. So all these things start to make that triangle really, really strong. And once you build it really strong, so you and I have a high level of trust. Would you agree? Mm-hmm. And so if I came in today and I did something that was completely abnormal, like against what I should say abnormal. I do a lot of stuff that's abnormal, but I mean, but like was
out of the realm of Chad.
What would you say? What would you think?
Something's off.
Chad, and we'd say things like, Chad's not himself today.
Yeah.
Well, what does that mean? Chad's not himself. Chad's portraying a different version than I'm used to. And you'd give me a pass, and you'd ask me if everything's all right, and because I've made deposits in that relationship. Well, let's just continue on, right? A couple of days later, I do something else. A couple of days later, I do something else. Eventually, you're going to start getting confused. You're going to be like, what's going on? Is this the real Chad or is this the real Chad? And if you're confused, you lose, right? You confuse them, you lose them. So now all of a sudden the trust would start to wane. And so we have to establish those three things. And then all those supporting behaviors, do what you say you're going to do, follow up, do all those things. Those strengthen what was already created. But you create it in that meet and greet. Salespeople lose sales in that first 5 minutes because they don't establish the triangle of trust. And then the buyer picks like, I don't sense they're authentic. Then they find what they focus on. I don't sense they care. They find what they focus on. I don't understand what he's saying. Find what they focus on. Therefore, trust is never formed, which means if I don't trust you, you can't influence me. And if you can't influence me, I'm not giving you my business. That is the trust triangle. Do you trust me?